history. Don't know much biology. Don't know much about a science book. Don't know much about the French I took. But I do know that I love you. And I know that if you love me too, what a wonderful world this would be. Don't know much about geography. Don't know much trigonometry. Don't know much about algebra. Don't know what a sliding rule is for. But I do know 1 and 1 is 2. And if this one could be with you, what a wonderful world this would be. Now, I don't claim to be an A student, but I'm trying to be. For maybe by being an A student, baby, I can win your love for me. Don't know much about history. Don't know much biology. Don't know much about a science book. Don't know much about the French I took. But I do know that I love you. And I know that if you love me too, what a wonderful world this would be. La ta 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 ta. History.
And forever. God
Sunday, Monday, happy days. Tuesday, Wednesday, happy days. Thursday, Friday, happy days. The weekend comes, my cycle hums, ready to race to you. These days are happy days. These days are share them with me. Goodbye gray sky, hello blue. There's nothing can hold me when I hold you. Feel so right, it can't be wrong. Rocking and rolling all week long. Sunday, Monday, happy days. Tuesday, Wednesday, happy days. Thursday, Friday, happy days. Saturday, what a day. Grooving all week with you. These days are ours. Share them with me. These days are happy and free. These happy days are yours and mine. These happy days are yours and mine. Happy days. Sunday, Monday, happy days. Tuesday, Wednesday, happy days. Thursday, Friday, happy days. The weekend comes, my cycle hums, ready to race to you. These days are gray sky, hello blue. There's nothing can hold me when I hold you. Feel so right, it can't be wrong. Rocking and rolling all week long. Sunday, Monday, happy days. Tuesday, Wednesday, happy days. Thursday, Friday, happy days. Saturday, what a day. Grooving all week with you. These days are ours. Share them with me. These days are happy and free. These happy days are yours and mine. These happy days are yours and mine. Happy days.
Would change the fortunes of this country forever. The East India Company would go on to become so wealthy and powerful that it helped turn Britain into a global superpower. Today, the British Library holds a copy of the original charter. It lists the names of the men who would build this extraordinary company, as Dr. Robert Blythe of the National Maritime Museum explains.
Amongst the names, we've got James Lancaster, the first company captain, so he leads the first ships out to trade with the East.
Was it an incredible culture shock for these people going out there from England?
Well, some had been before, they knew the route. Others had not, so the company begins to produce phrase books to assist with the negotiations.
Brilliant, look at this. The common forms of speech, first written in Latin, Malayan and Madagascar tongues. What are the key phrases do you think to learn?
Well, the key phrase will be how to get the price down, but they're looking for phrases for the quality of the pepper, what they want in exchange, how much money they might want for the pepper as well. So it's all about the business of exchange.
The company quickly became a trading empire, and by the 1700s, the bulk of its business was based in India.
So here we've got a page describing trade in 1730 with the Bay of Bengal, which becomes the centre of the East India Company's Indian trade. And here we've got calicos and chintzes being traded in enormous amounts.
That's a huge amount of money, £12,000 on chintzes here. The company became so successful that it stopped being simply a trading empire and became a political one. At its peak, it even had its own army of around 200,000 men. By the early 19th century, it controlled much of India, making laws and raising taxes. And that's when things started to go wrong.
The company gets a bit greedy with its tax, believing it can actually make its fortune from tax returns alone. So it really does begin to exploit the Indians, causing famine and real distress in India. In 1857, there's a mutiny in India. The Indian army rises up. The British government has to send troops from London to put down the mutiny, and the company is then abolished by the British government, and Parliament takes over control of India.
Despite this shameful end, the company left a powerful legacy. Little can Elizabeth have imagined that the company she gave her approval to would go on to become a world player over the next 250 years and lead directly to the expansion of the British Empire into Asia. But it's a long and complicated story. It's one of brilliant commercial acumen mixed with pretty ruthless exploitation. It might have been called the Honourable East India Company, but it didn't always live up to that name.
By the early 18th century, worried by the popularity of Indian textiles, wool and silk makers in England began protesting against the import of Indian cotton textiles. In 1720, the British government enacted a legislation banning the use of printed cotton textiles, chintz, in England. Interestingly, this act was known as the Calico Act. At this time, textile industries had just begun to develop in England. Unable to compete with Indian textiles, English producers wanted a secure market within the country by preventing the entry of Indian textiles. The first to grow under government protection was the calico printing industry. Indian designs were now imitated and printed in England on white muslin or plain unbleached Indian cloth. In 1764, the spinning jenny was invented by John Kay, which increased the productivity of the traditional spindles. The invention of the steam engine by Richard Arkwright in 1786 revolutionized cotton textile weaving. Indian textiles continued to dominate world trade till the end of the 18th century. European trading companies, the Dutch, the French, and the English made enormous profits out of this flourishing trade. These companies purchased cotton and silk textiles in India by importing silver. When the English East India Company gained political power in Bengal, it no longer had to import precious metal to buy Indian goods. Instead, they collected revenues from peasants and zamindars in India and used this revenue to buy Indian textiles.
On June 4, 1857, the Indian troops attacked their British officers and set fire to their quarters. The entire European community of 1,000 men, women, and children fled to a half-built barrack block on the edge of the city, hastily fortified against attack. 2 days later, Nana Sahib joined the rebels with his own army and took personal command of the siege. The makeshift fortress was raked by cannon and musket fire. As a mullah mockingly called it, Fort Despair. On June 10th, news of the revolt reached Britain, and 30,000 troops were sent to deal with the crisis. But it would take several months for the slow-moving troop ships to reach India. Meanwhile, at Kanpur and nearby Lucknow, the beleaguered British garrisons held out week after week under constant bombardment.
Several hundred women were besieged within makeshift defenses. It gradually whittled away, several of them having babies as went along, disease coming in, of course, lack of food. It was a most horrific experience.
One of the women, 18-year-old Amelia Horn, described the horrors in detail.
Every shot that struck the barracks was followed by heart-rending shrieks of women and children who were either killed outright by the projectiles or crushed to death by falling beams, masonry and splinters. Sometimes a whole family would be found lying dead, side by side.
The only source of water was a well swept by sniper fire.
On one occasion, we were obliged to drink some water mixed with human blood from the wounds of a native nurse or ayah, who, while standing nearby, had both her legs carried away by the bursting of a shell.
On June 12th, the hospital block was set alight by shell fire, burning many of the wounded to death and destroying all the remaining medical supplies.
No relief whatever could now be offered to the sick and wounded. There was nothing now to soothe their dying moments. The heat affected their wounds, and the flies settled on them and drove them crazy. It was now that our skirts were in demand. We tore every vestige to supply bandages for the wounded.
On the 25th of June, 1857, Nana Sahib offered a deal. If the British would move out, he guaranteed safe conduct for the survivors to leave Kanpur by boat down the river Ganges. They had no choice but to accept. The point of departure was a Hindu temple where the faithful took their ritual baths. A fleet of boats had been assembled with native crews to punt the survivors to safety. Thatched awnings protected them from the heat of the sun. But as the Europeans climbed aboard, the boatmen leapt ashore, scattering burning embers from their cooking stoves. Hundreds of native troops emerged from hiding and fired volley after volley into the burning boats. Mounted troopers rode into the water, slashing down with their sabers. Over 500 men, women, and children died in the massacre of Kanpur. Just 4 men escaped downriver to tell the tale. About 120 women and children who had survived the slaughter were rounded up on the riverbank. The captives were herded into a building where the Indian mistress of a British officer had once lived, known as a bibigar. But help was finally on the way. A scratch force of 1,000 Scottish Highlanders, a few English Fusiliers, and some loyal Sikhs had been sent from other parts of India. They marched down the Grand Trunk Road in the full heat of the Indian summer. Nana Sahib set out to confront them at the head of 5,000 rebels. The new rifles played a key role, picking the rebels off at long range. The result was a victory for the British. The survivors fled back to the city to warn their supporters.
The British are coming like mad beasts, caring for neither cannon nor musketry.
At the bibigar, the number of captives had risen to 180 women and children, crowded into the 3 rooms and courtyard of the house. Many of the prisoners were wounded, dying of cholera and other infections, or broken by heat and despair. A few recorded their experiences on scraps of paper, or scratched them on the walls with charcoal and broken bits of pottery. They could hear the rumble of guns as the relief force neared the city. But the faces that appeared at the windows were not those of British soldiers. The mutineers fired 2 volleys into the crowded room. But sickened by the slaughter, they refused to fire again. 4 butchers were recruited from the town. It was a little before sunset when they entered the bibigar. They emerged an hour later. At the sight of them, the remaining onlookers fled into the darkness. In the morning, a party of volunteers arrived to clear the bodies. They dragged them out of the building, stripped them of their blood-soaked clothing, and threw them down a nearby well. Eyewitnesses reported that several women and children were still alive, but they were thrown in along with the mutilated corpses.
I think the attacks on women can be explained in terms of a belief that the honour of a particular group was reposed in the women, and often when a group was conquered in war, women were attacked, raped, taken away into slavery and so on. This was part of humiliating an enemy.
The streets of Kanpur were deserted as the relief force entered the city. Thousands had fled before them. Loyalists directed the advance guard to the bibigar. The first to open the door was a young officer of the 78th Highlanders. He reported that the scene he saw was the most awful that the eye could behold. He was wrong. A few moments later, he found the well. The news reached Britain a few weeks later.
When the details of the mutiny begin to appear in the British press in the summer of 1857, there is horror and outrage. Stories were coming back of the murder of European women and children, often in the most hideous circumstances. And the sort of respect which the Victorians had for women and for children, this was outraged.
Victoria wrote to the wife of the Governor-General in Calcutta.
Our thoughts are almost solely occupied with India. My heart bleeds for the horrors that have been committed by people once so gentle on my poor countrywomen and innocent little children. It haunts me day and night.
The massacres at Kanpur were not only the worst atrocity the British could imagine. They were regarded by the men who had conquered India as the most shameful reproach. They had failed their women and children. The darkness of the well at the Bibigar closed over them all.
We're going to look at the history of education in colonial India under British rule. We'll see this is not an entirely encouraging story. Until Indian independence in 1947, educational expenditures per capita were less than 1% of GDP. To put this in perspective, consider the time period from 1860 to 1912. During these years, per capita expenditures on education in India were among the lowest in the world. Per capita, it averaged less than 1/100th of a pound per year. For purposes of comparison, in the Indian princely states, which were independent of British rule, it was about twice as high per capita. In Brazil and Mexico, it was about 5 times as high per capita. In the other dependent British colonies, it was about 18 times as high, again, per capita. As late as 1911, there were fewer than 3 primary schools for every 10 Indian villages. Educational expenditures often were controlled by local rural district boards. These boards were comprised of both British colonial officials and local elites. It seems the local elites had a great deal of influence over how the money was spent. For instance, in districts where Brahmins were a relatively high percentage of the population, there was more money spent on advanced secondary schooling, but there was not more money spent on primary schooling. In districts with a high proportion of Brahmins, there was a greater share of money spent on roads. This may be because the Brahmins were businessmen who wanted to get their goods to market, or because the Brahmins wanted to make it easier for themselves to get to the cities. When it came to primary school education, the Brahmins already had reasonable alternatives in the form of colonial government schools and urban schools, so they were less interested in promoting government expenditures on basic primary schooling. Some areas of India saw much more spending on schooling than others. For instance, in Bombay, per capita expenditures on education were 10 times higher than in Orissa. One thing is for sure, even when there was more money spent on schooling, for the most part, the benefits were not reaped by young girls. For more information on this topic, you can Google to these very useful papers.
I was born in Allahabad in North India in June of 1935. My father was working on the railways, and he had come out to India as a very young man when his father, who was a regimental sergeant major in the Royal Horse Artillery, had one of his Indian tours of duty, which so many military units used to have in those days. He came out with his wife and 3 children. My father was the eldest. And my father loved India so much that when his parents went home, he asked to be left behind because his passion was the railways, and he'd managed to get himself apprenticed into a railway workshops where he did very well, and rather strangely his parents agreed. But he stayed in India and corresponded with them. And being a Brit in a largely Anglo-Indian community, because the railways were dominated by Anglo-Indians, he made himself thoroughly at home in this sort of rather lower echelon of the Raj, because the Brits in the railways usually were in top management, and my father it was unusual to have an Englishman apprenticed and working as a locomotive designer in this almost entirely Anglo-Indian community. But he loved it, and he made great friends amongst the Anglo-Indians, and eventually he met my mother at a Railway Institute dance in Tundla, a place called Tundla, and apparently fell in love with her straight away, and was firmly resisted by my mother for a long time until her mother told her that she should marry him because he would improve the blood, which gives you some indication of how important it was to be anything but Anglo-Indian in those days. Anyway, I was the first progeny out of 3 sons, and I have no recollection of Allahabad because very shortly after my birth we moved, I think initially to Lucknow and then eventually to Jamalpur, where my brother Paul was born about 18 months after me. Jamalpur was the great railway base in Bihar, in eastern India. Kipling wrote about it. He had a long chapter on it in his one of his books, and how if you were not in the railways you really had no place or no reason to be in Jamalpur. It was that much of a railway city. It had suffered the consequences of a serious earthquake a year before I was born. The Bihar earthquake was one of the worst ever experienced in India, and Gandhi had deplored the great loss of human life. And they had managed to rebuild much of it by the time my father was posted there. I certainly wasn't aware of what that had involved because I was too young. But we grew up, I grew up, certainly my first 5 or 6 years were spent in Jamalpur. And then, following the pattern of so many other railway families, we began moving around from one railway station to another. They were generally cantonments, as they were described, because they were adjacent to military barracks. So you had this Anglo-Indian railway community, Chikanjal, with some military unit. And it led to some interesting anecdotes. I remember my grandfather telling me the story of one such cantonment railway platform, railway station, where the Anglo-Indian station master used to wait for the cannon to be sounded on the hill in the military barracks so that he could set the station clock, which was always about 5 minutes slow. So he would set the hands of the station clock, and about 3 minutes later the commandant of the camp would arrive on his horse and check his watch with the station clock. So, as you might imagine, this particular cantonment began to slip further and further back into time. But yes, that was the basis of my upbringing, the railways, which still have a very large part in my affections because I love railways. I've inherited my father's love of railways.
And looking back, how do you think that's affected your view of empire as well?
I don't know whether it was the railways that did it. I developed something of my father's love of Kipling and, you know, the importance of empire and Britain's role in setting a good example to other colonial powers. I was proud of, I was weaned on British history, and which was, you know, colonial history. My history of India, of course, was very distorted by the fact that it was written for the English public education system. And it wasn't until years later that I discovered heroes of Indian history like Tipu Sultan, you know, who resisted the British presence, quite rightly, and who fought them off in Mysore and died defending his kingdom at Seringhapatnam. And when I went there many years later, I was so impressed by the history of this extraordinary man who'd, you know, been such a hero of the Indians and who was vilified by the Brits because he opposed them. And so history can be very distorted. It depends who's writing it.
And what about your mother? Did she talk about her experiences in India to you at a later date?
Yes, she did. When she could still recollect them. She had a very strong family base in Tunla, where she grew up. She was from a family of 5 and a very close family. Her father claimed to be of Scottish descent, Arnold Watson, his name was, and he'd married Kathleen Maud Sturrock, whose family had been German and who I gathered had not taken well to the fact that her mother, Kathleen's mother, had married a man of mixed blood, in her case somewhat diluted blood, a man called Thompson. But as a result, the mother of Kathleen was kind of thrown out of the family, as I understand. And she was very young. She was only about 15 when she married my grandfather. But it was love at first sight and remained so in all the years that they lived together. She was an extraordinarily strong woman. She had a magnetic personality. She was very petite, a little bit dark, but immensely intelligent. Great reader of books, musician, painter. In this tiny little railway community where there couldn't have been more than about 200 families, she set about establishing a theatre and, you know, running the latest Cole Porter and Jerome Kern musicals, with her family all taking part. Quite a remarkable woman. She wrote a novel about an incestuous relationship between a brother and sister, which was very forward for its time, never got published. She was barred by the Calcutta Statesman eventually from submitting any more entries into their weekly crossword puzzle because she was winning them all. I still have somewhere her annotated dictionary, which she used. It was her faithful companion. But when she became annoyed by the school teacher in the primary school, I'd been sent to a railway primary school, she convinced my parents that she would do a better job of educating me. So she took my brother and myself under her wing she equipped her little railway bungalow, miles away from where my parents lived, with school desks, school books and textbooks and a blackboard, and gave us a really rigorous education, almost one-on-one, one-on-two really. And she was extremely strict. I remember smarting from her ruler raps on my knuckles, and then she'd disappear into the bedroom, and we knew she was crying her eyes out for having to do this. You know? But she was a lovely person, and I missed her enormously when she died very young, because she reached a point where she couldn't educate us anymore. Her health was suffering, so we were sent off to boarding school. And shortly after our admission, I heard she died. It was a huge shock. She was only 52. So yes, she was fundamental to my life, and she was basically the most important person in my life. I mean, we spent more time with her than we did with our own parents, because she was suffering the empty nest syndrome. Her own children had grown up, and I was the eldest of the next generation. So I was kind of her darling, I suppose, and she wanted to rear me herself, which she did.
Can you tell me about the education that you received from her?
Well, I thought it was very good. It was very balanced. I mean, we did all the subjects, short of chemistry, I think. I don't remember any test tubes and that sort of thing, but it was quite well-rounded. I mean, she was educating herself in the process, sort of working out the prospectus for the following day. She really labored over this, and intensely. And it was so good that I sailed easily through my subsequent years. I went to St. Xavier's School. Mind you, competition was fierce in India, because you're in classes with aspiring young Indians who are immensely ambitious and whose whole lives depend on how well they can do. Whereas in my case, of course, it didn't seem to be that important. So I was falling behind in grades, but it wasn't her fault. I mean, she at least got me into those classes. And in fact, when we eventually came to England in 1946, I got a scholarship into grammar school on the basis of primarily the education I'd received from my grandmother, which helped a lot.
You mentioned also that there was a small railway community wherever you went. Did you get a sense of what that was like as a child? Was it quite close-knit, for example?
Very close-knit, yes. We knew all the families. We were invariably all Anglo-Indian, with the exception of the few top management Brits who lived in a separate part of the cantonment, and kept to themselves. But we had a great time. It was a marvellous way to grow up. My only frustration was the fact that we were living in our own little bubble world. We weren't part of Greater India, We considered ourselves apart from the unwashed masses. And that frustrated me, because I wanted to go out and explore. I'd read Kipling, and I wanted to be part of India, But this was strongly disapproved. I wasn't allowed to go wandering off into the native quarter, as it were. We were chaperoned by our own servants, and given firm instructions as to where we could and couldn't go. And that frustration, I think, has led to this subsequent yearning to see more of the real India.
Do you think there was a kind of very particular Anglo-Indian identity that was quite separate from the British and from the Indians?
There was, but the irony was that we all desperately tried not to be Anglo-Indian. We all, the stigma of racial impurity in those days was very strong. Touch of the tar brush and things like that. So, of course, when we eventually left India, there was no point in pretending amongst ourselves. But when we scattered in the great diaspora that took place when partition and independence were looming in 1947, we all tried desperately to settle into our chosen adoptive communities as, natives, Englishmen or Australians or Canadians, or adopt the camouflage of the country that had taken us in. And we were reluctant to actually acknowledge that we were Anglo-Indian. In fact, one of the funniest things that happened to me when I published my autobiography was the reaction from some of my family, who were shocked not by the fact that I'd admitted to being gay, but the fact that I was admitting to being Anglo-Indian. They refuted this. Even now, I have an aunt in Australia who strongly resents the fact that I said I'm Anglo-Indian.
So why do you think that was? Was it because of the stigma attached to it in colonial India?
It certainly was. And I think they were this determination to claim their British inheritance or Scottish inheritance was so strong that they actually convinced themselves that they were pure-blooded Canadian or Australian or Scottish or whatever. And they weren't deceiving. They were deceiving themselves. They were in denial, I suppose. Whereas I kind of chose to fly this flag vigorously. I was proud of being Anglo-Indian. I thought, when I got to England, I didn't want to be just another Englishman, I wanted to be different. And I had the first class opportunity to be so by claiming to be Anglo-Indian. Which of course would provoke stupid questions like, did I live in a wigwam or a hut or something? But, I cast those aside, and I never found any difficulty in acknowledging my Anglo-Indian inheritance. But I was of a different generation. I was of that younger generation, and the world was changing. After the war, the world was changing. You saw the beginnings of the great tides of population, the refugee populations, the tidal movements that have changed the nature of the world. No country now can claim to be intact and to have its population unsullied by other races. We're all a mixed up world now, and so it was easier after the war, and it's become progressively easier since.
Can you remember what was the attitudes like in your community towards Indian independence and partition?
One of acute anxiety, I think, because we knew that the only world we'd known up to then was going to change. Quite rightly, the Indians were asserting themselves. They wanted India to be Indian. And we suspected that we would suffer, we would find it hard to adjust. A lot of people did stay on, and there is still quite a large Anglo-Indian community, and many of them are still in the railways. But nearly all of my immediate circle migrated. We all left. My father could see no future in staying on in India. So there was this tremendous diaspora, really. Mainly, in the case of my family, mainly to Britain. Some went to Australia, where I still have a large family of friends and relatives. some to Canada. But yes, there was a belief that the India we knew was ending, and it would never be the same. Since writing these books, I have met Anglo-Indians who stayed on in India and who've told me that they went the other way. They chose to make themselves more Indian, where we were striving to make ourselves more fitted for our adoptive communities. They wanted to blend into the new India. And many of them changed their names, and their children married into Indian families, so that they consider themselves more Indian now than Anglo-Indian.
Peter, what do you think are your strongest kind of sensory memories from India, like smells or sounds or visually?
Gosh, they can come back so quickly, you know. Some spice or aroma can suddenly recall in a flash. I loved it. I lapped it up. I especially loved travelling on the railways, because the journeys were quite long. It would take, I think, a couple of nights to go from, say, Calcutta to Bombay. And you'd be stopping at little wayside halts where you'd hear the bustle and commotion of tea sellers and the calls of garam cha, you know, these little earthenware cups in which they sold their hot tea. It was full of atmosphere. I just loved leaning out of the window or pulling up the blinds from my bunk at night and seeing all that activity on the platform and wondering what world lay beyond that platform, you know, what other community lay beyond there. Yeah, I loved India. I felt as if a large part of me had been left behind when we left India. I was 11, and I have to tell you, I was not impressed with Britain. I was surprised at the smallness of it. I'd expected some awe-inspiring sense of being in the motherland of this huge empire, you know, where everything was big somehow and grand, and it wasn't. It was shabby, and, you know, post-war 1946, post-war austerity England was a very sorry-looking place. Dark and dismal, people with ration books, struggling to get their lives back together again. I remember our ship arrived at Liverpool, where the people I understood were called Lilliputians. And I mixed them up with the people in Gulliver's Travels, those little people who tied Gulliver down. And I thought, yes, they are small, aren't they? Oh, it's stupid. And the other shock was, of course, seeing white men labouring, you know, doing manual, menial work. Something I had never been prepared for. It was a completely different world. But basically, everything seemed small. The railway carriages were small. The countryside was like a counterpane, you know, everything tiny and beautiful, but petite. No vistas anywhere, no grandness, no spacious horizons. Everything looked cramped. And I was hugely disappointed. I'd expected something much more awe-inspiring.
And how about your family? How did they assimilate back into British life?
Badly. We went to stay with my father's father, who, as I mentioned, was a retired sergeant major, regimental sergeant major from the Royal Horse Artillery, and who had been a martinet of a man all his life. And his whole family had feared him, and I think one of the reasons my father had run away to the railways was because he was in awe of his father. And it was a very strange thing. I now recognize that my grandfather was actually jealous of my father's career in India, because my father had done very well. He'd become extremely successful. He was the head of his, locomotive design work in Kanchapara, and that was a very big railway workshop. So, amazingly, he did what most fathers would never dream of doing. He tried to put my father down and lower his self-esteem and tell him that there was not much future for him in England because everything he'd done in India was of no consequence. And he'd better pull his socks up and sort of make a fresh start. And he so demoralized my father that my father actually ended up with a nervous breakdown. Something for which I've never forgiven my grandfather. Because my father was a very bright man and he could have done so much more, but he lost all his self-confidence as a result of that. And we therefore found it extremely hard to manage. My father was out of a job. He turned up the very offer that had brought us back to England. It was an excellent job up north in Newcastle. And he went up there and was so shocked by conditions in Newcastle, he came back and told my mother we couldn't possibly live there. And he was out of work for a long time. We were scraping pennies. We were running out of his savings very rapidly. I remember in Hastings, we'd often not have enough pennies for the gas meter to finish cooking the food. So I knew poverty, I used to stuff cardboard into my shoes because there were holes in my soles, and I didn't want my mother to have to buy new shoes, so I would walk to school on cardboard soles. I think it was a good thing. It taught me frugality, and mind you, once I actually started earning money, I threw all that overboard and became a terrible spendthrift. But I don't regret those years. They were salutary years. Yeah.
And when did you move down to Hastings with your family?
Well, we left my grandfather fairly soon because we realized there was no point in continuing to see my father suffering like this. So we went to Southend initially to occupy a house that had been let by an uncle, my mother's brother, Trevor. And he'd just left to go up north to Liverpool. So we took over their house in Southend. Not Southampton. Did I say Southampton? It wasn't Southampton. It was Southend-on-Sea.
Yeah.
And I went to school there. Again, I had to be tested. I'd missed the grammar school scholarship exams, but the headmistress was sufficiently caring to allow me to take them belatedly in the privacy of her office, and I passed. And she was, she formed a great attachment for me, and was very sorry to see us leave. We went to Hastings because we understood it was warmer down south, by about 50 miles. And we had another relative there who was singing the praises of Hastings. So we moved in with them initially, and then got a house of our own in St. George's Road, which is where I lived, I suppose, from the age of 12 till the time I left England, 10 years later, 22. A little terrace house in a scruffy working class area of Hastings. But it saw many comings and goings of family, and so many of my relatives remember it with affection because it was a base for their travels. They always came to see us. And yes, we had happy years there.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. Let me tell you how it will be. There's one for you, 19 for me. 'Cause I'm the tax man. Yeah, I'm the tax man. Should 5% appear too small? Be thankful I don't take it all. 'Cause I'm the tax man. Yeah, I'm the tax man. If you drive a car, I'll tax the street. If you try to sit, I'll tax your seat. If you get too cold, I'll tax the heat. If you take a walk, I'll tax your feet. Tax man. 'Cause I'm the tax man. Yeah, I'm the tax man. Don't ask me what I want it for. Mr. Wayne.
with such provisions as may be necessary to guarantee during a period of transition the observance of certain obligations and to meet other special circumstances, and also with such guarantees as are required by minorities to protect their political liberties and rights. In such statutory safeguards as may be made for meeting the needs of the transitional period, it will be a primary concern of His Majesty's government to see that the reserved powers are so framed and exercised as not to prejudice the advance of India through the new constitution to full responsibility for our own government. His Majesty's government, whilst making this declaration, is aware that some of the conditions which are essential to the working of such a constitution contemplated have not been finally settled. But it believes that as the result of the work done here, they have been brought to a point which encourages the hope that further negotiations after this declaration will be successful. And now, my friends, we go our various ways. Our 10 weeks of valuable cooperation and pleasant companionship and friendship are ended. And finally, I hope, and I trust and I pray, that by our labors together, India will possess the only thing which she now lacks, to give her the status of a dominion amongst the British Commonwealth of Nations. What she now lacks for that, the responsibilities and the care, the burdens and the difficulties, but the pride and the honor of responsible self-government. Well done.
Prime Minister, your momentous and historic words are ringing in my ears, and your message to my motherland, worded as it has been in such wise and gracious language, has so deeply touched my heart that words fail to express my feelings. I congratulate you, sir, the members of your government, as well as the members of the two great political parties in England, on your wise decision and bold statesmanship. Your name, sir, will not only be written in letters of gold, but will go down to history as the name of one who knew how to combine statesmanship with wisdom and friendship.
Before saying that I leave the chair for the last time, which I'm very sorry really to do, I must communicate to you the reply which His Majesty has sent to the message you directed me to send to him this forenoon. I have received with much pleasure the loyal message which the chairman of your conference has conveyed to me on your behalf. The time has now come for me to bid you Godspeed on the conclusion of your deliberations, which I inaugurated some 9 weeks ago. I have followed your proceedings with the closest interest and have been impressed with the dignity and earnestness with which they have been conducted, and with the unity of aim which has inspired them. It was not to be expected that in 9 short weeks, however close and intensive the labor that was crowded into them, and I know full well how exacting your labors have been, a clear-cut and final solution of the vast problems which confronted you should be found. But I am persuaded that great as is the volume of patient thought and careful work still to be done, you have opened a new chapter in the history of India. I am sure that you will, one and all, strive to secure the aid of your countrymen in carrying on the task in the same spirit that has marked your discussions. And I hopefully look forward to an outcome which will restore peace and contentment throughout India. Signed by his own hand, George R. I. The last time, the conference is adjourned.
Ladies and gentlemen, before we go, I suggest 3 cheers for King Emperor.
Goodbye. Thank you so much for the help you've given us and the nice things you said about it. Goodbye.
Very much for all the tea.
Here he is at last, the mystery man of India. Our first glimpse as the Rajputana came alongside at Marseille. And there's a woman of whom you've probably all read, but never seen in a picture. Miss Madeline Slade, the English daughter of an admiral, who now prefers to be known as Malara Ben. She's one of Mr. Gandhi's most devout disciples. She's leading the way ashore now, and just behind her comes Mr. Gandhi, dressed as he said he would be, in just his loincloth, even in the chilly climes of Europe. And he's carrying with him his pots and pans, which he declared at the customs. He was trotted around Marseille to several receptions and made 1 or 2 speeches which rather frightened the French authorities. But when asked to speak into the sound film microphone, he said, "I think not." And so we go on our way to England. Well, here we are at Folkestone, with the Biarritz coming alongside, and as Gandhi said, in proper English weather, pouring rain and bitterly cold. Miss Slade was the first ashore to tend to the luggage, that is, the goat's milk, etc. She was followed by Gandhi's son, and then came the little man, still scantily clad, but with an extremely wet blanket around his tiny frame. I'm sure he must have been frozen. We were in thick overcoats. He picked his way through the puddles along the quay side, and he was wearing sandals, by the way, to the waiting motor car, for he decided that he'd rather go up to London by road. He insisted on sitting up in the front seat with the driver. He said that he could see better that way. So he tucked himself in, and so off to London, whilst his followers went by the boat train. In town, quite a lot of people had waited in the pouring rain outside the Friends Meeting House on the Euston Road to see what he really looked like. But at first they were quite disappointed because he went in the back way. But shortly afterwards he left by the front way. And then they really did see quite a lot of him, even his knees. No, he won't speak into the microphone. And so to his poplar home, where we leave this bizarre little man, whose coming has caused so much comment, complete with loincloth, spinning wheel and goat's milk, feeling sure that he cannot complain of his reception or the publicity he has received, from which, by the way, we always understood that he shrank.
Good afternoon and welcome to Hurlingham Park. You join us just as the competitors are running out onto the field on this lovely winter's afternoon here with the going firm underfoot and very little sign of rain. Well, it certainly looks as though we're in for a splendid afternoon sport in this, the 127th Upper Class Twit of the Year show. Now, the competitors will be off any moment, so let me just identify them for you. Vivian Smith-Smythe-Smith has O-level in kennel hygiene. Simon Zinc Trumpet Harris, married to a very attractive table lamp. Nigel Incubator Jones, his best friend is a tree, and in his spare time he's a stockbroker. Gervais Brook Hamster is in the Guards, and his father uses him as a waste paper basket. And finally, Oliver St. John Mollusk, Harrow and the Guards, thought by many to be this year's outstanding twit. Now they're moving up to the starting line. Are their understarters' orders? They're off! Oh, no, they're not. No, they didn't realise they were supposed to start. Never mind, we'll soon sort that out. The judge is explaining it to them now. I think Nigel and Gervais have got the idea. All set to go. Oh, and they're off! And it's a fast start this year. Oliver St. John Mollusk running a bit wide there. And now they're coming coming into their first test, the straight line. They've got to walk along this straight line without falling over. And Oliver's over at the back there. Simon's coming through quite fast on the outside, I think. Simon and Nigel, both of them coming through very fast. No, there's Nigel there, number 3, I'm sorry. And on the outside, there's Gervais coming through just out of shot. And now, the position, Simon and Vivian at the front coming up the matchbox jump. 3 layers of matchboxes to clear. And Simon's over. And Vivian's over beautifully. Oh, the jump of a lifetime, if only his father could understand. Here's Nigel, he's refused. No, Gervais is over. Nigel again. He's only just hit the top. And now it's Gervais. Gervais is going to jump in, is it? No, he's jumped the wrong way. There, that's Gervais. There he goes. Nigel's over. Beautifully. Now it's only Oliver. Oliver and Gervais. Oh, bad luck. And now it's kicking the beggar. Simon's there and he's putting the rope in. And not terribly hard. There's a lot of Starlings being down, so Simon can move on. Now Vivian's there. Vivian is there and waiting for a chance. Here he comes. Oh, a real pile driver. A real pile driver. And now Simon's at number 1. Vivian 2. Nigel 3. Gervais at 4. And Oliver bringing up the rear. There's Oliver. There's Oliver now. He's at the back. I think he's having a bit of trouble with his old brain injury. He's going to have a go. No, bad luck. But he's up. He doesn't know when he's beaten this boy. He doesn't know when he's winning either. He doesn't have any sort of sensory apparatus known to man. He's outstanding up to it. Oh, bad. There's Gervais. He's putting the boot in there. He's no need for him to do this. He's letting him down. The steward's giving him a little bit of advice. Yes, he can move on now. He can move on to the Hunt photograph. Yes, I think he's real. Yes, he's off. Gervais is there, and Oliver's still at the back, having toward the matchbox. And there's Simon now in the sports car. He's reversing into the old woman. He's got her absolutely beautifully. Now he's going to accelerate forward there to wake up the neighbour. There's Vivian, I think. No, Vivian's lost his keys. No, there's Vivian. He's got the old woman slowly but surely right in the midriff. And here he is. Here he is to wake up the neighbour now. Simon right in the lead, comfortably in the lead. But he can't get this neighbour woken up. He's slamming away there as best he can. He's getting absolutely no reaction at all. No, there, he's woken him up. Wait, and the crowd are really rising to him there. And there I can see, who is that there? Yes, that's Nigel. Nigel has woken the neighbour. My God, this is exciting. Gervais, no, this is out in the front there. Simon is supposed to insult the waiter and he's forgotten. And Oliver has run himself over. What a great wit. And now here comes Vivian. Vivian to insult the waiter, and he is heaping abuse on him. He's just humiliating him there, and he's through into the lead. Absolutely expert coordination between mind and body. No, they're hitting it there. Here we go again. Simon's fallen backwards. Here's Nigel, and he's tripped. Nigel has tripped, and he's under. That's the last moment, but no, here we are. Here's Nigel right at the head of the field, and now he's got to shoot the rabbit. These rabbits have been tied to the ground as they tend to be a bit frisky, and this is only a one-day event. And they're blazing away there. They're not getting quite the results that they might. Gervais is in there, trying to bash it to death with the butt of his rifle, and I think Nigel's in there with his bare hands. Yes, they've had a couple of hits, and the whole field is up again. And here they are. They're coming up to the depths. Gervais first, Vivian second, Simon third, and now they've got to take the bars off from the front. This is really difficult, this is really the most difficult part of the entire competition. My God, they're having a bit of trouble in there, I think. They're really flying now, and the crowd is getting, and I think some of the Brits are getting rather excited too. But anyway, Vivian is there, Vivian is coming through. Simon's in second place, and there's Oliver, he's dead, he's not necessarily out of it. There goes Nigel, no, he's lost something, no, he hasn't, and Gervais running through to this final obstacle. Now all they have to do here to win the title is to shoot themselves. Simon has a go, he misses, Nigel misses. Now there's Gervais, and Gervais has shot himself. Gervais is up at class quit. And so the final result of the class quit of the year, Gervais, Brookhamster of Kensington and Weybridge, runner-up, Vivian Smith of Kensington, and third, Nigel Incubator Jones of Henley.
भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्छल जलधि तरंग तव शुभ नाम जागे तब शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जनगण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे
That's all, folks.